The emergency room doors burst open at 11:52 p.m. Wednesday night, and Michael Davis ran through them, carrying 6 pounds of terror in his arms. Sarah's small body hung limp against his chest, her lips tinged with a blue that made his stomach turn to ice. A nurse materialized beside him, hands already reaching. "How long has she been unconscious?" The words came from somewhere behind the scrubs and urgency, and Michael tried to form an answer through the panic squeezing his throat. 5 minutes, maybe 10. She just collapsed. The nurse took Sarah with practiced efficiency, and suddenly Michael's arms were empty. A doctor emerged from behind a curtain, barking orders. Michael couldn't process. They rushed Sarah through double doors into a trauma bay, and the doors swung shut in Michael's face with a hydraulic hiss that sounded like finality. He stood alone in the waiting room under fluorescent lights that hummed too loud. A blood pressure cuff dangled from the intake desk where he'd stumbled through Sarah's medical history between gasps for air. His shirt collar was damp with sweat, and when he looked down, he saw a small smear of blood on the fabric. Sarah had bitten her tongue when she fell. A television mounted in the corner played the late news with the sound muted, and the closed captioning scrolled across the bottom in white letters that blurred together. Michael sank into a plastic chair, bolted to the floor, and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. 48 hours earlier, the alarm screamed at 5:45 a.m. on Monday morning, and Michael dragged himself out of bed before the sound could wake Sarah. The apartment was still dark, city lights filtering through thin curtains that never quite blocked out Chicago's perpetual glow. He moved through the kitchen on muscle memory, feet finding the path they'd walked 730 times in the 2 years since Jennifer died. The medication chart hung on the refrigerator door, held in place by a magnet shaped like a heart. Sarah's prescriptions were listed in his own handwriting, dosages and times color-coded to prevent mistakes. Red for morning, blue for evening, green for the emergency inhaler they prayed he'd never need. He pulled the pill crusher from the drawer and measured out the beta blocker that kept Sarah's damaged heart valve functioning. Congenital heart defect. The words still felt foreign in his mouth, even after 6 years of living with them. Sarah had been born with a heart that didn't quite work right, a valve that leaked just enough to require constant medication and quarterly cardiology appointments. Jennifer used to crush the pills into applesauce every morning while Michael got ready for work. Now he did both jobs, and the applesauce always had too many lumps. He heard Sarah's footsteps in the hallway before she appeared, small and sleep-rumpled in purple pajamas. She rubbed her eyes with both fists and shuffled into the kitchen, and Michael felt his chest tighten the way it did every morning when he saw her alive and breathing. "Morning, Daddy. Morning, baby." He knelt down to her level, fingers automatically finding the pulse point on her wrist. Her heartbeat thrummed against his fingertips, steady and strong for now. "Heart feeling good?" Sarah nodded and climbed into her chair at the small dining table wedged against the wall. She was 6 years old and small for her age, all elbows and knees and dark eyes that saw too much. The doctor said the heart condition might stunt her growth. Michael said she was perfect. The photograph sat on the counter where it always sat, propped against the toaster in a silver frame. Jennifer smiled out from behind the glass, frozen at 32, with her head thrown back mid-laugh. Sarah stared at it while Michael spooned scrambled eggs onto her plate. "Does Mommy watch us from heaven?" The question landed like it always did, heavy and impossible to answer in a way that satisfied either of them. "Every single day, baby." Sarah picked up her fork, but didn't eat. "Does she know about the sad lady?" Michael's hand froze halfway to the coffee pot. What sad lady? At your work? When you took me for show and tell last month. She paused, considering. The lady in the big office looked like she never smiles. Career day. Michael had brought Sarah to Morgan Industries 6 weeks ago when the school required parents to talk about their jobs. She'd sat quietly in his cubicle while he explained what an operations analyst did, which mostly involved making spreadsheets and getting ignored by supervisors. He didn't remember Sarah meeting anyone from the executive floor. Why do you think she's sad? Sarah shrugged and ate a bite of eggs. Her face was like that time you showed me Mommy's picture and started crying. All empty. The words hung in the air between them, and Michael turned back to the coffee maker so Sarah wouldn't see his expression. She was right. He knew exactly who she meant. Elizabeth Morgan, CEO of Morgan Industries, whose portrait hung in the lobby and whose name appeared on the quarterly earnings reports that landed in everyone's inbox. Sarah had somehow wandered up to the executive level during career day while Michael was in a meeting, and she'd looked into the face of the most powerful woman in the company and seen loneliness. It made Michael's chest ache in a way that had nothing to do with Jennifer's ghost. He drove Sarah to school at 7:30, navigating morning traffic with the radio tuned to the station that played the songs Jennifer used to sing. Sarah hummed along in the back seat, kicking her feet against the car seat she'd hopefully outgrow by next year. The pediatric cardiologist said her heart was stable for now. The surgeon said they'd need to replace the valve before she turned 10. Michael said nothing at all because he didn't have $187,000 for open-heart surgery. Morgan Industries' corporate tower rose 37 floors above street level, all glass and steel, and money that glittered in the October morning sun. Michael parked in the back lot where the lower-level employees kept their cars, spaces marked by faded paint and oil stains. The executive parking was underground with assigned spots and charging stations. He'd never seen it. The operations floor occupied the fourth level, sandwiched between accounting and human resources. Michael's cubicle sat in the back corner where the fluorescent lights flickered and the ventilation system rattled. He'd worked here for 4 years, ever since Jennifer's cancer diagnosis made it clear they needed better health insurance. The work was tedious and invisible. The pay was enough to keep Sarah fed and medicated. The prospects for advancement were non-existent. His computer booted up with a chime that echoed off the fabric walls, and Michael opened his email to find 17 new messages. The fourth one down made his jaw tighten. Q3. Process optimization proposal rejected. Richard Phillips, his direct supervisor, had sent it at 6:47 a.m. with no explanation beyond a single line. Focus on assigned tasks. Innovation isn't your department. Michael clicked through to the attached file and scanned the proposal he'd spent 3 weeks developing. The current system for managing client data involved 6 redundant steps and 3 separate software platforms. His redesign would consolidate everything into a single interface, eliminate duplicate entry, and save an estimated 200 labor hours per quarter. Conservative projections put the annual savings at $2.3 million. Richard had rejected it without reading past the executive summary. A burst of laughter echoed from the cubicle cluster near the break room, and Michael glanced over to see 3 of his coworkers gathered around someone's computer screen. Brad Williams stood in the center, grinning like he'd won the lottery. Brad was 29, white, mediocre at spreadsheets, and very good at making Richard laugh during staff meetings. Michael pushed back from his desk and walked over. "What's going on?" Brad turned, still grinning. "Just got promoted to senior analyst. Starting next month. Congratulations. Michael kept his voice level. What's the new role? Leading the client data integration project. Brad gestured at the screen where a project outline glowed. Going to streamline the whole system. Richard said it's got potential to save millions. Michael looked at the outline. It was his proposal, word for word, with Brad's name in the byline where Michael's had been. The anger rose in his throat, hot and sharp, and he swallowed it back down because losing his temper wouldn't change anything. It never did. Sounds like a great opportunity. He walked back to his cubicle and sat down in the chair that squeaked when he shifted his weight. His phone buzzed with a text from Barbara, his mother, whose timing had always been either perfect or terrible depending on the day. Call me when you get a chance. Important. Michael stepped into the stairwell where the phone signal was better and dialed. His mother picked up on the first ring. Michael Anthony Davis, you listen to your mama. He leaned against the concrete wall and closed his eyes. I'm at work. That baby girl needs more than a father running on fumes. Jennifer's been gone 2 years. It's time. The words landed like they always did when Barbara decided to meddle. I can't just replace her. Who said replace? I said live. Big difference. Barbara's voice softened. I know you loved her. I loved her too. But she's watching you from heaven. And she's worried. Michael pressed his thumb against the bridge of his nose where a headache was starting to build. What do you want me to do? I want you to meet someone, a nice professional woman, your age, good heart, just dinner. Mama, one dinner, Michael, that's all I'm asking. Barbara paused. Jennifer would want you happy, baby. The guilt worked its way under his skin the way his mother knew it would. He thought about Sarah's question at breakfast, about the sad lady who never smiled. He thought about coming home to an empty apartment every night while Sarah slept. He thought about the photograph on the counter that he talked to sometimes when the loneliness got too heavy to carry alone. One dinner. That's it. Barbara's relief radiated through the phone. Saturday night, 7 o'clock, Andre's on Michigan Avenue. Her name is Elizabeth. Michael didn't ask for a last name. He didn't want to know. Across town in a penthouse apartment 40 floors above street level, Elizabeth Morgan woke at 6:30 a.m. to a silent room and a city view that sprawled to the horizon. The alarm on her phone played soft classical music that was supposed to ease her into consciousness, but she'd been awake since 5 o'clock anyway. Sleep had become optional somewhere around her 30th birthday. Her phone screen showed 47 notifications, and she scrolled through them while coffee brewed in the kitchen. 47 people wishing her happy birthday, and every single message came with an attachment. Happy birthday, Elizabeth. I've attached the revised merger contract for your review. Happy 32nd. Quick question about the quarterly projections. Birthday wishes. Can you speak at our fundraiser next month? She opened the 10th message and stopped reading. They were all the same. Business wrapped in pleasantries. Favors disguised as friendship. Not one person had sent her a birthday wish without wanting something in return. The photograph on her nightstand showed a man in his 60s with salt and pepper hair and eyes that crinkled when he smiled. Thomas Morgan, founder and former CEO of Morgan Industries, dead 3 years from a heart attack that took him in his office on a Tuesday afternoon. Elizabeth had found him slumped over his desk, gone before the paramedics arrived. His last words to her gasped out between chest compressions that did nothing. The company needs you. Be stronger than I was. She'd been CEO since the day they buried him, thrust into a role she'd been training for her whole life, but never expected to claim at 29. The board had voted 6-5 to approve her appointment, with the 5 dissenting votes all coming from men who'd worked with her father for decades. They questioned every decision she made. They compared her to Thomas at every meeting. They waited for her to fail so they could say they'd been right all along. Elizabeth dressed in a charcoal suit and heels that added 3 inches to her 5'6" frame. Armor carefully assembled to project competence and control. She arrived at Morgan Industries at 8:15 and rode the executive elevator to the 37th floor, where her office occupied the corner with windows on 2 walls. Her assistant had left the quarterly reports stacked on her desk in alphabetical order by department. The board meeting started at 9 o'clock in the conference room that seated 20. 15 members showed up, which meant a quorum. Robert Harrison sat at the far end of the table, 73 years old and still angry that a woman half his age signed his paychecks. He waited until Elizabeth finished presenting the Q4 expansion proposal before speaking. "Your father built this empire through caution, Miss Morgan. Perhaps we should table this discussion." Elizabeth kept her voice level. "The data shows a 23% return on investment within 18 months. Data doesn't account for intuition." Harrison leaned back in his chair. "Which comes with experience." The subtext hung in the air, thick enough to choke on. "You're too young, too female, too unproven." Elizabeth had heard it in a dozen different phrasings since taking over, and it never got easier to swallow. "I'll revise the proposal and we can revisit next quarter." The vote to table passed 9-6, and Elizabeth returned to her office with her expansion plan dead on arrival. She closed the door and allowed herself 30 seconds to sit with her head in her hands while the anger and frustration coiled in her chest. Then she wiped her face, straightened her shoulders, and got back to work. The phone on her desk rang at 5:30, just as Elizabeth was reviewing the contracts that needed signing before end of business. The caller ID showed Margaret Hayes, her aunt and the only family member who still bothered to call. "Elizabeth, darling, before you say no, I'm saying no." Margaret's laugh crackled through the speaker. "It's your birthday, and you're spending it alone. Again." Elizabeth looked around her empty office at the certificates on the walls and the awards on the shelves and the framed magazine cover that called her Chicago's most powerful woman under 40. "I have work. I have someone I want you to meet. Dinner at 7, Andre's on Michigan Avenue." She paused. "He doesn't know you're a CEO. Just be Elizabeth for once, not Morgan Industries." The idea settled in Elizabeth's chest like hope, fragile and dangerous. A dinner with someone who didn't want something from her. A conversation with someone who saw her as human instead of a signature on a contract. It was either the best idea Margaret had ever had or the cruelest. "Fine. 1 hour. Then I'm leaving." Andre's was the kind of restaurant where the menus didn't list prices and the waitstaff spoke in hushed tones. Michael arrived at 6:50, wearing the black suit he'd bought for Jennifer's funeral, the only suit he owned. It fit tighter across the shoulders than it had 2 years ago, and the collar felt like it was strangling him. The hostess led him to a corner booth with white tablecloths and candles that flickered in glass holders. And that's when he saw her. A woman sat alone at the table, face buried in her hands, shoulders shaking with sobs she was trying to muffle. Mascara ran down her cheeks in dark streaks, and her breathing came in short gasps that suggested she'd been crying for a while. The other diners pretended not to notice, eyes sliding past her with the careful indifference of people determined not to get involved. Michael's first instinct was to turn around and walk out. This wasn't his problem. He had enough problems of his own. But something in the way she sat there, so completely alone in a room full of people, made him hesitate. He thought about Jennifer's funeral. The way everyone had stood around the grave offering condolences that felt like scripts, then disappeared back to their own lives. He thought about sitting in their apartment that night with Sarah, asleep in the next room, wishing someone had stayed. Just one person, just to sit in the silence and acknowledge that grief was real. Michael approached the table slowly. "Excuse me, are you okay?" The woman looked up, and recognition hit him like a fist to the sternum. "Elizabeth Morgan, CEO of Morgan Industries." The woman whose signature appeared on his paychecks and whose portrait hung in the lobby 33 floors below her office. The most powerful person in a company of 2,400 employees, and she was crying alone on her birthday. Every instinct told him to leave. Getting involved with someone this powerful could only end in disaster. He was nobody. She was everything. And whatever was happening to her right now was so far above his pay grade, it might as well be happening on a different planet. He turned to go. "Please." Her voice stopped him, small and broken, and nothing like the commanding tone she used in the company-wide emails. "Can you do something for me?" Michael turned back. She was looking at him now, mascara-streaked face and red eyes, and an expression that held no recognition at all. She didn't know who he was. To her, he was just a stranger in a funeral suit, standing beside her table, while her blind date failed to show. "Can you pretend you don't know who I am? Just for tonight." Her voice cracked. "I'm so tired of being Elizabeth Morgan." Michael stood frozen. He thought about Sarah, his job, all the reasons this was a terrible idea. Then he thought about what Jennifer would do if she saw someone hurting this badly. She'd sit down. She'd stay. He pulled out the chair across from Elizabeth and sat. "I'm Michael, and I don't know you." Elizabeth stared at him like he'd just performed a magic trick. "You don't? Should I?" She let out a laugh that sounded half-broken. "Everyone knows me, or thinks they do." Michael leaned back in the chair that probably cost more than his monthly rent. "Well, I'm not everyone." A waiter materialized beside the table with menus and a wine list, and Elizabeth ordered a glass of Cabernet with hands that shook slightly. Michael asked for water. The waiter disappeared with a knowing look that suggested he'd seen his share of first dates gone wrong. Elizabeth wiped her face with a cloth napkin, trying to compose herself. "I'm sorry, this is not how I planned to spend my evening." "Bad day? You could say that." She straightened her shoulders, and Michael watched her try to rebuild whatever walls had just come down. "What do you do?" "I'm an operations analyst." Michael didn't mention the company name. Fourth floor cubicle, spreadsheets, the exciting life. Elizabeth almost smiled. "Sounds stable." "It pays the bills." "Barely." He paused. "What about you?" The question hung between them, and Elizabeth's expression shifted. She opened her mouth, closed it, then said something that might have been the truth or might have been a lie. "I work in management." "Stressful? You have no idea." The wine arrived, and Elizabeth took a long sip. The tension in her shoulders began to ease by degrees, and when she spoke again, her voice was softer. "Can I tell you something?" Michael nodded. "Today is my birthday. I received 47 messages this morning. Every single one of them came with an ask, a contract to review, a favor to grant, a check to write." She looked down at her glass. "Not one person wished me happy birthday without wanting something in return." The confession landed heavy in the space between them, and Michael felt something shift in his chest. He thought about his own birthdays, about Jennifer making crooked cakes and Sarah drawing cards with too much glitter. He thought about how even in the hardest years he'd always had someone who loved him just for being him. "Happy birthday, Elizabeth." She looked up at him, and her eyes filled with fresh tears. But these were different tears. "You're not going to ask for anything?" Michael shrugged. "I'd offer to buy you dinner, but I'm guessing you've already paid for this place." She stared at him for a long moment, and then something unexpected happened. She laughed. It was small and surprised, like she hadn't expected the sound to come out of her own mouth. But it was real, and Michael felt the tight knot in his chest loosen just slightly. "You're strange. I've been called worse." The waiter returned to take their orders, and they both ordered without looking at the menus. Elizabeth got salmon. Michael got chicken because it was the cheapest entree. When the waiter left, Elizabeth leaned forward slightly. "Tell me something about yourself. Something real." Michael considered the question. He could give her the surface version, the story he told strangers at Sarah's school functions. But she'd just shown him her wounds. The least he could do was show her one of his. "My wife passed away 2 years ago. Cancer. She fought for 11 months, and it wasn't enough." He traced his finger along the edge of his water glass. "She left behind me and our daughter Sarah. She was 4 when it happened." Elizabeth's expression changed, shifting from polite interest to something deeper. "I'm sorry. The first year was the worst. I didn't know how to be a father without her. I didn't know how to be anything without her." He looked up and met Elizabeth's eyes. "But every morning Sarah would wake up and need breakfast, need her medications, need me to keep going. So I did." The words hung between them, and Elizabeth was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "My father died 3 years ago. Heart attack. No warning. One day he was running the company, and the next day he was gone." She swirled the wine in her glass. "My mother left when I was 7. I barely remember her face. So when my father died, I inherited everything. The business, the board, the expectations. I was 29 years old." Michael listened without interrupting. "Everyone thinks I'm powerful. They see the office, the title, the money. But do you want to know the truth?" She looked at him directly. "I'm just an orphan who's been pretending she knows what she's doing. Every single day I walk into that building terrified that today is the day everyone figures out I'm a fraud." The confession hung in the air between them, raw and unguarded. Michael looked at this woman who ran a billion-dollar empire and saw someone just as broken as he was, just as tired, just as alone. "Maybe we're more alike than I thought." Elizabeth met his eyes, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but recognition. Two wounded people who had finally found someone who didn't look away. They talked for 2 hours about small things and big things, about Sarah's obsession with purple and Elizabeth's secret love of old detective novels, about the weight of other people's expectations and the fear of failing someone who was counting on you. Michael told her about Jennifer's last days in hospice, about holding Sarah through the nightmares that followed. Elizabeth told him about finding her father's body, about the board members who still called her Thomas's little girl. By the time the restaurant began to empty, Michael realized he hadn't felt this light in years. The grief was still there, would always be there, but something else had crept in alongside it. Something that felt dangerously close to hope. When they finally stood to leave, Elizabeth hesitated. What happened tonight? Can it just be tonight? Michael understood. She was scared. Scared of what this could become. Scared of what it could cost. Tonight never happened. She gave him a small, grateful smile. Thank you for staying. Elizabeth's car was waiting at the curb, a black sedan with tinted windows, and a driver who opened the door without being asked. She slid into the back seat and the car pulled away, taillights disappearing into Chicago traffic. Michael drove home in silence. The apartment was dark when he walked through the door, and he found the babysitter asleep on the couch with the television playing quietly. He paid her and carried Sarah to her bed, tucking the purple blanket around her small body. Her heart monitor beeped softly on the nightstand, green numbers glowing in the darkness. He sat beside her for a long time, watching her breathe. Something inside him had shifted tonight. Something he'd thought was dead had begun to stir, and he didn't know whether to be grateful or terrified. Across town, Elizabeth entered her penthouse and stood at the window, looking out at the city lights. The silence pressed in from all sides, deafening the way it always was. But for the first time in months, she didn't feel completely alone. That night, she slept without dreaming. The next morning, Michael arrived at work with his heart pounding. He didn't know what to expect. Part of him hoped he'd see her. Part of him hoped he wouldn't. At 9:15, the elevator doors opened and Elizabeth stepped out onto the 4th floor. She was transformed. Gone was the vulnerable woman from the restaurant. In her place stood the CEO, ice-cold and untouchable, heels clicking against the tile as she strode toward the executive elevator. She passed within 10 feet of Michael's cubicle. She didn't look at him once. Michael felt something sink in his chest, of course. Last night was a moment of weakness for her, nothing more. He was nobody. She was everything. The fantasy was over before it had even begun. He threw himself into his work, trying to forget, trying to focus on the spreadsheets and the data entry and the quarterly reports that nobody read. But at 3:17 that afternoon, an email appeared in his inbox. From e.morgan@morganindustries.com, subject none. He opened it with trembling fingers. Last night meant everything. I haven't forgotten. E. Michael exhaled for what felt like the first time all day. His hands hovered over the keyboard for a long moment before he typed back, "Neither have I." M. He hit send and leaned back in his chair, staring at the fabric walls of his cubicle. Somewhere 33 floors above him, Elizabeth Morgan was probably sitting in her corner office with windows on 2 walls, reading his reply. 2 people in the same building, separated by everything that mattered in the world except the one thing that didn't. The phone on his desk rang, and Michael picked it up without checking the caller ID. He was expecting Barbara with more questions about Saturday's dinner. Instead, he heard Sarah's school nurse, and her voice made his blood run cold. "Mr. Davis, you need to come to the school right away." Sarah collapsed during recess. Michael made it to the school in 14 minutes, a drive that should have taken 25. He ran 3 red lights and took corners too fast, mind spinning through worst-case scenarios that all ended with Sarah on a gurney. The elementary school parking lot was half empty at 2:30 in the afternoon, and he abandoned his car in a fire lane before sprinting toward the main entrance. The nurse's office smelled like antiseptic and old bandages. Sarah sat on the examination table with her legs dangling, face pale but conscious. Relief hit Michael so hard his knees almost buckled. "Baby girl, Daddy." Her voice came out small and tired. "I'm okay." The school nurse stood beside the table with a clipboard and an expression that suggested otherwise. "Mr. Davis." Sarah's heart rate dropped significantly during recess. She was unconscious for approximately 90 seconds before we called the paramedics. Michael's world tilted sideways. Paramedics? They checked her vitals and recommended immediate follow-up with her cardiologist. The nurse handed him a form covered in medical jargon and checkbox marks. "Her oxygen levels are stable now, but given her history, you need to get her evaluated today." Michael pulled out his phone and called the pediatric cardiology office at Northwestern Memorial. while Sarah watched him with eyes too old for 6 years. The receptionist put him on hold twice before confirming they could squeeze Sarah in at 4 o'clock if he could get there within the hour. Traffic from the north side would be brutal, but Michael would drive through hell if that's what it took. He carried Sarah to the car and buckled her into the booster seat she'd been using since she was 3. The drive to Northwestern took 47 minutes, and Michael spent every one of them watching her in the rearview mirror. She looked out the window at the building sliding past, humming a song he didn't recognize. "How do you feel?" "Tired." She paused. "My chest felt funny on the playground, like my heart forgot how to beat right." The words landed in Michael's stomach like stones. He'd heard the cardiologist explain Sarah's condition 100 times, but the technical language never made it less terrifying. Mitral valve prolapse with regurgitation. The valve that controlled blood flow between her heart's chambers didn't close properly, forcing her heart to work harder to pump blood through her body. Most kids with mild cases lived normal lives with medication. Sarah's case wasn't mild. The cardiology wing occupied the 7th floor of the Prentice Women's Hospital building. Michael had memorized the route from the parking garage to the waiting room, every turn and elevator and hallway junction. They checked in at 3:52, and the nurse called Sarah's name at 4:11. Dr. Patricia Chen had been Sarah's cardiologist since birth, a woman in her 50s with steady hands and a voice that never promised anything she couldn't deliver. She listened to Sarah's heart with a stethoscope, while Michael stood against the wall, trying not to fall apart. The exam lasted 6 minutes that felt like 6 hours. "I want to run some tests, an echocardiogram and a stress test, to see how the valve is functioning under exertion." The tests took another 90 minutes. Michael sat in the waiting room with outdated magazines he didn't read, while Sarah underwent imaging that would show exactly how damaged her heart had become. Through the window, he could see Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon, gray water meeting gray sky with no clear line between them. His phone buzzed with a text from Barbara, asking how Saturday's dinner went. Michael stared at the message for a long moment before typing back a lie about it being fine. He couldn't think about Elizabeth Morgan right now, couldn't afford to let his mind wander towards something that felt like hope when Sarah's life hung in the balance of test results he wouldn't understand. Dr. Chen called him back into the consultation room at 6:35. Sarah sat on the exam table eating a lollipop the nurse had given her, purple sugar staining her lips. The doctor pulled up imaging on her computer screen that showed Sarah's heart in cross-section, chambers and valves rendered in grayscale. "The regurgitation has progressed. The valve is deteriorating faster than we'd hoped." Dr. Chen pointed to a section of the image where blood flowed backward through a gap that shouldn't exist. "I'm recommending surgical intervention within the next 90 days. Michael's hearing went fuzzy around the edges. "Surgery? A valve replacement or repair, depending on what we find when we get in there." Dr. Chen pulled up a different screen showing surgical options and recovery timelines. "With children Sarah's age, we typically try repair first. If that's not viable, we'll use a mechanical valve." The words kept coming, technical explanations about incisions and bypass machines and recovery periods, but Michael couldn't process any of it. He was stuck on the number Dr. Chen had mentioned in passing, the one that appeared at the bottom of the cost estimate she'd printed, $187,000. His insurance through Morgan Industries would cover roughly half. The rest would fall to him, due within 30 days of the procedure. Michael did the math in his head while Dr. Chen talked about surgical teams and success rates. After rent, utilities, Sarah's medications, and the minimum payments on Jennifer's medical debt, He had about $300 left at the end of each month. He'd need 307 months to save $92,000. 25.5 years. Sarah would be 31 by then, if she lived that long. Can we finance it? Dr. Chen's expression softened with the kind of pity that made Michael want to put his fist through the wall. The hospital has payment plans, but they'll require a significant down payment. I can have financial services reach out to discuss options. Michael thanked her and led Sarah out of the office with the cost estimate folded in his pocket like a death sentence. They stopped at a drive-thru on the way home because cooking felt impossible, and Sarah ate chicken nuggets in silence while Michael pushed French fries around a cardboard container. His phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't Barbara. From e.morgan@morganindustries.com. Subject, none. Are you all right? I heard about the emergency. E. Michael stared at the message. Elizabeth had somehow found out about Sarah's collapse within hours. She probably had alerts set for employee incidents, part of whatever system monitored the 2,400 people whose lives depended on her company running smoothly. The concern was probably genuine. It was also completely irrelevant to the reality of his situation. He typed back with one hand while steering with the other. Just family stuff. Thanks for checking. The reply came 30 seconds later. If you need anything. Michael deleted the message without responding. He didn't need anything Elizabeth Morgan could give him. He needed a miracle, and those didn't come from corner offices on the 37th floor. The apartment felt emptier than usual that night. Michael got Sarah ready for bed at 8 o'clock, checking her pulse 3 times while she brushed her teeth. The heart monitor on her nightstand showed numbers within normal range, but normal didn't mean safe. Not anymore. He read her 2 chapters from a book about a girl who could talk to animals, voices for each character the way Jennifer used to do. Sarah's eyes drooped halfway through the 2nd chapter, and by the time Michael reached the end, she was asleep with her hand curled around the stuffed elephant that had been Jennifer's last gift. Michael sat in the kitchen with his laptop open to the hospital's financial services portal. The payment plan calculator showed monthly installments of $1,800 for 5 years, assuming a $15,000 down payment he didn't have. He could sell his car, but then he'd have no way to get Sarah to her appointments. He could take out a loan, but his credit was destroyed from Jennifer's medical bills. He could ask Barbara for help, but his mother was living on Social Security, and whatever she made cleaning houses 3 days a week. He could ask Elizabeth Morgan for a loan. The thought appeared before he could stop it, and shame burned in his chest. That's what people would think anyway if they knew he was seeing her. That he was using her money, her position, her power. That he was exactly the kind of man Richard Phillips assumed he was. Michael closed the laptop and pressed his palms against his eyes until he saw stars. Jennifer's voice echoed in his memory, something she'd said during her sickest days when the morphine made her philosophical. You can't control what happens to you, only how you face it. He'd faced Jennifer's death with dignity because she'd taught him there was no other way. He'd face this the same way, even if it killed him. The week that followed passed in a blur of spreadsheets and medication schedules and nights spent researching surgical financing options that all required down payments he couldn't make. Michael showed up at Morgan Industries every morning at 8 and left at 5, and he didn't see Elizabeth once. The executive elevator never stopped on the 4th floor, and the cafeteria where he ate lunch was 3 floors below where she worked. Friday afternoon, his computer pinged with a calendar invitation. Conference Room 7B, 8 p.m., Maintenance Review. The meeting organizer was listed as Facilities Management, but the room number was on the executive floor. Michael stared at the invitation for a full minute before accepting. He stayed late under the pretense of finishing quarterly reports, waiting until the operations floor emptied and the cleaning crew started their rounds. The executive level was quiet at 8 p.m., carpeted hallways swallowing the sound of his footsteps. Conference room 7B sat at the end of a corridor lined with portraits of former board members, all white men in suits who looked like they'd never missed a meal. The door was unlocked. Inside, Elizabeth stood at the window with her back to him, silhouetted against the city lights. She'd taken off her suit jacket, and her hair was down instead of pulled back in the severe bun she wore during business hours. "I wasn't sure you'd come." Michael closed the door behind him. "I wasn't sure I should." Elizabeth turned to face him. There were bags under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide, and her expression held the kind of exhaustion that came from fighting battles nobody else could see. "I've been thinking about you all week. About what you said at dinner. I said a lot of things. You said you didn't know how to be anything without her." Elizabeth crossed the room until she stood close enough that Michael could smell her perfume, something floral and expensive. "I know that feeling." The space between them felt charged with all the things neither of them knew how to say. Michael's hands curled into fists at his sides, and he forced himself to stay still. "Why am I here, Elizabeth? Because I wanted to see you, because I can't stop thinking about you." She paused. "Because for the first time in 3 years, I met someone who didn't want anything from me." The irony twisted in Michael's gut like a knife. He wanted something now, wanted $92,000 and a guarantee that Sarah would survive surgery, and a future where loving this woman wouldn't destroy everything he'd built. But those wants felt like betrayals of the man he'd promised Jennifer he'd be. "How's Sarah?" The question surprised him. "Stable for now. She needs surgery within 90 days. Elizabeth's expression shifted. "What kind of surgery?" "Heart valve replacement." Michael kept his voice level. "It's expensive." The words hung between them, and he watched Elizabeth's mind work through the implications. He could see the moment she understood, the way her eyes widened slightly and her lips parted. She was going to offer help, offer money, offer to solve his problem the way powerful people always did. "Don't." The word came out sharper than he intended. Elizabeth froze. "Don't offer to pay for it. Don't offer to help. Don't make this about that. Michael, I wasn't." "You were." He ran a hand over his face, suddenly exhausted. "And I get it. You see someone struggling and you want to fix it. But I need to handle this myself." "Why?" Elizabeth's voice rose slightly. "Why does it have to be yourself? Why can't you let someone help you? Because if you pay for my daughter's surgery, I'll never know if you love me or if you just felt sorry for me." The truth spilled out before Michael could stop it. "Every time we're together, I'll wonder if I'm here because I earned it or because I owe you. And Sarah will grow up knowing her father took charity instead of fighting for her. That's not charity, that's love. Is it?" Michael looked at her directly. "Or is it control? Is it you solving problems because that's what CEOs do?" The accusation landed hard, and Elizabeth's face went pale. "You think I'm trying to control you? I think you're used to buying solutions. But I'm not a problem to be solved." The silence stretched between them, brittle and sharp. Elizabeth's hands trembled slightly, and Michael watched her struggle to find words that wouldn't make this worse. "I should go." He turned toward the door, but Elizabeth's voice stopped him. "Wait." Michael looked back. Elizabeth had wrapped her arms around herself like she was trying to hold something together that was coming apart. "You're right. I do try to fix things. It's all I know how to do." She looked down at the floor. "My whole life, people have needed things from me. Money, decisions, approval. And I gave it because that's what I thought love was. solving problems, being useful. Michael waited. But you don't need me to solve anything. You need me to just be here. And I don't know if I know how to do that. The confession broke something open in Michael's chest. He crossed the room and took Elizabeth's hand, her fingers cold in his. Then we'll figure it out together. She looked up at him with eyes that held hope and fear in equal measure. I'm scared, Michael. Of what? Of caring about you this much. Of losing you. Of being the reason you lose yourself. Michael pulled her closer until her forehead rested against his shoulder. You won't lose me, and I won't lose myself, but we have to do this the right way. What's the right way? I don't know yet, but it starts with honesty, with respect, with both of us standing on our own before we stand together. Elizabeth's arms wrapped around him, and they stayed like that for a long moment while the city glittered outside the windows. When they finally pulled apart, something fundamental had shifted between them. This wasn't a fantasy anymore. It was real, with all the complications that came with it. Michael left the building at 9:30 and drove home through streets still crowded with Friday night traffic. His phone buzzed at a red light with a text from an unknown number. Sunday morning, my place. I'll make pancakes. Or try to. He smiled despite everything and typed back a single word. Address? Sunday morning arrived with gray skies and a forecast calling for rain by afternoon. Michael woke Sarah at 8 o'clock and told her they were visiting a friend. She asked if it was the sad lady from his work, and Michael realized his daughter saw more than he gave her credit for. Elizabeth's building was in the Gold Coast, a high-rise with a doorman and marble floors, and the kind of security that required Michael to show ID before being allowed into the elevator. The penthouse occupied the entire 40th floor, accessed by a private elevator that opened directly into her living room. The space was enormous and impersonal, decorated in grays and whites, with furniture that looked expensive and uncomfortable. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a view of Lake Michigan stretching to the horizon. Sarah's entire apartment could have fit in Elizabeth's kitchen. Elizabeth appeared from around a corner, wearing jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a ponytail. It was the first time Michael had seen her in anything other than business attire, and the casualness of it made her seem younger, more vulnerable. You came, you invited us. Michael gestured to Sarah, who stood beside him, staring at the view. This is Sarah? Elizabeth knelt down to Sarah's eye level, movements careful and deliberate. Hi, Sarah. I'm Elizabeth. Sarah studied her with the intensity of someone conducting a scientific evaluation. You're the sad lady from Daddy's work. Elizabeth's composure flickered. I suppose I am. Do you still feel sad? Not right now. Elizabeth glanced up at Michael, then back to Sarah. Right now, I feel a little nervous. Why? Because I've never made pancakes before, and your dad said you're an expert. Sarah's face brightened. I can help. Daddy burns them sometimes, but I know how to tell when to flip. They moved into the kitchen, which was all granite and stainless steel, and appliances that probably cost more than Michael's car. Elizabeth had bought pancake mix and syrup and eggs, ingredients arranged on the counter like she'd been studying for a test. Sarah climbed onto a bar stool and directed operations with the confidence of a general commanding troops. You need to spray the pan first. Not that much. Okay, now pour the batter in a circle. Elizabeth followed instructions with laser focus, tongue between her teeth, while she poured batter that spread into something resembling a pancake. The first one came out lopsided and slightly burned, and Sarah giggled. It's okay. Daddy's first one always looks like that, too. Michael watched from the doorway while Elizabeth and his daughter made breakfast together, something warm and unexpected unfurling in his chest. Sarah hadn't laughed like this since Jennifer died, hadn't looked this comfortable with another adult in 2 years. And Elizabeth, the woman who commanded boardrooms and made executives sweat, was taking instructions from a 6-year-old with complete sincerity. "Can we make them purple?" The question came from Sarah, and Elizabeth blinked in surprise. Purple pancakes? It was Mommy's favorite color. Sarah's voice went quiet. "Daddy says we can keep purple things around, so she knows we remember her." Elizabeth looked at Michael, a question in her eyes. Michael nodded. They found food coloring in a drawer, and Elizabeth added drops until the batter turned lavender. The pancakes came out looking slightly alien, but tasting fine, and they ate at the breakfast bar while Sarah told elaborate stories about her stuffed animals. Elizabeth listened like every word mattered, asking questions and laughing at punchlines only a child would find funny. After breakfast, Sarah discovered Elizabeth's balcony and begged to go outside. The morning was cold but clear, and Michael bundled Sarah in her jacket while Elizabeth unlocked the sliding glass door. They stood 40 floors above the street, watching boats move across the lake like slow-moving toys. Sarah tugged on Elizabeth's sleeve. "Can I tell you a secret?" Elizabeth knelt down. "Of course. Daddy gets sad at night sometimes. I hear him crying when he thinks I'm asleep." Sarah's voice was matter-of-fact, no judgment or fear. "Do you think you could make him not sad anymore?" The question landed like a physical blow. Michael started to intervene, but Elizabeth held up a hand. "I can't promise that, sweetie. Sad isn't something one person can fix for another person, but I can promise I'll try to make him smile. Is that okay?" Sarah considered this with the gravity of someone weighing life or death decisions. "Okay, but you have to really try, not just pretend. I promise. Cross my heart." Sarah seemed satisfied and wandered off to investigate a planter box filled with dead flowers. Elizabeth stood and faced Michael, and there were tears in her eyes. "She's remarkable. She's everything." Michael's voice came out rougher than intended. "Which is why I can't mess this up. Can't let her see me lose my dignity because I was desperate." "You won't." Elizabeth took his hand. "I won't let you." The moment stretched between them, charged and fragile. Then Sarah shrieked from across the balcony, pointing at a bird that had landed on the railing, and the spell broke. They stayed for another hour, and when they finally left, Sarah hugged Elizabeth goodbye with the unself-conscious affection of a child who'd decided someone was worthy of trust. In the elevator going down, she looked up at Michael with eyes too wise for 6 years. "I like her, Daddy. I think Mommy would like her too." The words stayed with Michael for days. Monday morning brought Richard Phillips to Michael's cubicle at 9:37 a.m. He stood in the opening with arms crossed and an expression that suggested he'd been rehearsing this conversation. "Davis, my office, now." Michael followed him to the small glass-walled room that overlooked the operations floor. Richard closed the door and sat behind his desk, and Michael remained standing because he hadn't been invited to sit. "I've been hearing some interesting rumors about you." Michael kept his expression neutral. "Rumors about you and certain people in the building." Richard leaned back in his chair. "Care to explain why someone saw you leaving the executive floor Friday night?" "I had a meeting." "With whom?" "Facilities management. Maintenance review." Richard's smile was cold and knowing. "Right. Maintenance." He pulled a folder from his desk drawer and slid it across the surface. "I also noticed your work quality has dropped significantly this quarter. Missed deadlines, incomplete reports." "That's not true. 3 incidents documented." Richard tapped the folder. "I'm putting you on a performance improvement plan. 90 days to show measurable improvement or face termination." Michael's jaw tightened. This is retaliation. This is management. Richard stood, signaling the meeting was over. Maybe if you spent less time networking upstairs and more time doing your job, we wouldn't be having this conversation. Michael took the folder and walked out before he said something that would get him fired on the spot. Back at his desk, he opened the file and scanned the fabricated violations. Every complaint was technically plausible, but functionally false, documented with the dates and times that painted a picture of an employee skating by on minimal effort. It was a setup. Richard knew about Elizabeth, or suspected, and he was building a case to justify firing Michael before whatever was happening between them became public knowledge. 90 days to prove his worth, during which anything Elizabeth did for him professionally would be seen as favoritism, and anything he achieved on his own would be dismissed as too little too late. Michael was trapped. His phone buzzed with an email from Elizabeth, and his stomach dropped before he even opened it. Subject: Director of Innovation position. Michael, I'm creating a new role focused on process optimization and system innovation. Salary $145,000, reporting directly to me. Your proposals over the past 4 years demonstrate exactly the kind of forward thinking this position requires. I'd like to offer it to you, Elizabeth. Michael read the email 3 times, and each time it felt more like a death sentence wrapped in good intentions. This was everything he should want: recognition for his work, compensation that would pay for Sarah's surgery twice over, a chance to do meaningful work instead of rotting in a 4th-floor cubicle. It was also the worst possible thing Elizabeth could have offered him. He walked to the stairwell where the phone signal was better and called her direct line. She picked up on the first ring. I can't accept that position. Michael, I can't accept it because Richard just put me on a performance improvement plan. 90 days to prove I'm worth keeping. He leaned against the concrete wall. If you promote me now, everyone will know exactly why. They'll say I slept my way to the top. You earned this. Your work speaks for itself. Does it? Michael's voice rose. Or am I getting this because of us? Because you want to help me? Because you feel guilty about Sarah? The silence on the other end stretched long enough that Michael thought the call had dropped. Look at me. Elizabeth's voice came through, quiet but firm. No, I mean it. I need you to hear this. You earned this position. You're getting it because you've submitted 4 proposals in 4 years that were better than anything my directors have produced, and Richard buried all of them because he's a racist who can't stand seeing you succeed. Michael, Say it again. Tell me I earned it. The demand hung between them, and Michael recognized the pattern Elizabeth was using, the same one he'd used on her in the conference room, forcing honesty through repetition. You earned it, Michael Davis. You earned it through 4 years of brilliant work that was ignored because you were black, and because you were quiet, and because you had the misfortune of working for a man who sees threats instead of talent. Michael closed his eyes. Say it again, without us in the equation. Tell me I'd get this position if we'd never met. The pause that followed told him everything. I can't say that. Elizabeth's voice wavered, because if we'd never met, I wouldn't have looked at your file. I wouldn't have pulled your proposals from the archives. I wouldn't have seen what you were capable of. Exactly. Michael opened his eyes and stared at the blank concrete wall. So how do I know this is real? Because I'm offering it to every analyst who's been buried by middle management. Elizabeth's voice strengthened. I'm creating 3 positions, not 1. I'm reviewing every rejected proposal from the past 5 years. I'm rebuilding the innovation pipeline because you showed me it was broken. That doesn't change how it looks. Then let them look, let them talk, let them question it. Elizabeth's breath caught. or don't. Turn it down. Keep your dignity. Keep your distance. Keep proving you can survive anything as long as you do it alone. The accusation stung because it was true. Michael had spent 2 years surviving instead of living, building walls instead of bridges, choosing lonely pride over vulnerable connection. He'd convinced himself it was strength. Maybe it was just fear. I need time to think about it. Take all the time you need. But, Michael, one more thing. What? Dignity isn't about doing everything yourself. It's about knowing your worth, and you're worth more than that cubicle. She hung up before he could respond, and Michael stood in the stairwell, staring at his phone until the screen went dark. The week that followed felt like walking through underwater. Michael went to work each morning and sat in his cubicle, completing the tasks Richard assigned with mechanical precision, documenting everything in case the performance improvement plan became grounds for termination. He picked Sarah up from school every afternoon and helped with homework and crushed her medications into applesauce. He read bedtime stories and checked her pulse and listened to the heart monitor beep its steady rhythm through the wall between their bedrooms. He did not accept Elizabeth's job offer. He also did not decline it. The email sat in his inbox like unexploded ordnance, and twice he drafted responses before deleting them. Every argument he constructed fell apart under scrutiny. Accepting meant validating Richard's assumptions and living under the shadow of favoritism. Declining meant choosing pride over Sarah's future, stubborn dignity over a surgery he couldn't afford. There was no clean answer, and the paralysis ate at him. Friday evening, Barbara called while Michael was washing dishes. Sarah sat at the table, drawing pictures of birds with purple crayon, tongue between her teeth, the way Jennifer used to do when concentrating. "You sound tired, baby. Long week." Michael balanced the phone between shoulder and ear while scrubbing a pot. "How are you?" "I'm fine. I'm calling about you." Barbara's voice carried that particular tone that meant she'd been thinking about this conversation for days. "Margaret told me about Elizabeth." Michael froze with his hands in soapy water. "What about her? That she's the CEO of your company? That you've been seeing her?" Barbara paused. "That you turned down a promotion because you're scared of what people will think? It's more complicated than that. Is it? Or are you letting pride get in the way of providing for Sarah?" The accusation landed hard because it echoed the one Elizabeth had made. Michael rinsed the pot and set it in the drying rack, buying time to formulate a response that wouldn't sound defensive. "I'm not letting pride do anything. I'm trying to maintain my integrity. Your integrity won't pay for Sarah's surgery." Barbara's voice softened. "Michael, I know you loved Jennifer. I know you promised her you'd never compromise who you are. But she also made you promise to take care of that baby, and sometimes taking care means accepting help. This isn't help. It's charity disguised as merit. Is it? Or is it a woman who sees your value trying to give you opportunities you've earned?" Barbara sighed. "I've cleaned houses for 15 years, baby. You know how many times I've had to smile while rich people treated me like I was invisible? But when Mrs. Henderson offered to help pay for your college because she saw you had potential, I didn't say no out of pride. That was different." "How? Because she was white? Because she had money? Because accepting help made you feel like you owed someone?" Barbara's voice sharpened. "You're so busy protecting your dignity that you can't see the difference between being used and being loved." Michael had no answer for that. He stood at the sink, staring out the window at the alley behind his building, where garbage bins overflowed and broken glass glittered under streetlights. "Just think about it. Think about what Sarah needs, not what your pride demands." Barbara hung up, and Michael finished the dishes in silence. When he turned around, Sarah was watching him with those two old eyes. "Are you fighting with Grandma?" "We weren't fighting, just disagreeing." "About Miss Elizabeth?" Michael sat down at the table across from his daughter. "How did you know that?" Sarah shrugged and kept drawing. "You get sad when you talk about her, like you want something, but you're scared to have it." The observation cut deeper than any accusation Barbara or Elizabeth had made. Michael looked at the drawing taking shape under Sarah's hands. Three figures holding hands with a woman in clouds above them, all rendered in purple crayon. "Can I ask you something, baby girl?" Sarah nodded. "What did Mommy always say about being brave?" Sarah's face scrunched up in concentration. "Love is brave. That's what she said when she was sick and you were crying." Michael felt something crack in his chest. He remembered that night, one of Jennifer's last good days, before the morphine made her sleep more than she stayed awake. She'd taken his hand and made him promise two things: take care of Sarah and don't stop living. He'd kept the first promise. The second one had been harder. What if Daddy did something brave, something that might make people talk, but would help our family? Sarah put down her crayon and looked at him directly. "Like accepting the job from Miss Elizabeth?" Michael blinked. "How do you know about that?" "I heard you talking on the phone. You weren't being quiet." Sarah tilted her head. "Why won't you say yes? Because people will think I only got it because I'm dating her, that I didn't earn it." "Did you earn it?" "I think so. Then who cares what people think?" Sarah picked up her purple crayon and added another figure to her drawing. "Mommy used to say people who judge you for being happy are just mad they're not." The wisdom of it settled over Michael like a weight and a relief simultaneously. He'd been so focused on what people would think, on maintaining some abstract concept of dignity, that he'd forgotten the most important thing. Sarah needed that surgery, and teaching her to refuse help out of stubborn pride wasn't strength. It was cowardice dressed up as virtue. "You're right, baby girl. You're absolutely right. So you'll say yes? I'll think about it. Really think about it this time." Sarah smiled and went back to her drawing, satisfied. Michael watched her for a long moment before pulling out his phone. The text went to Elizabeth's personal number, the one she'd given him after the pancake morning. "Can we talk? In person?" The reply came 30 seconds later. "When?" "Tonight. After Sarah's asleep. I'll send a car." Michael put Sarah to bed at 8:30, reading 3 chapters instead of 2, because she asked nicely, and because he needed the extra time to figure out what he was going to say. By the time he finished, she was already asleep, with her hand curled around the stuffed elephant. He kissed her forehead and checked the monitor one more time before grabbing his jacket. The car arrived at 9 o'clock, a black sedan with tinted windows, and a driver who didn't make small talk. Michael gave Barbara's address as the destination for Sarah's emergency contact, then settled into leather seats that probably cost more than his monthly rent. The drive to Elizabeth's building took 20 minutes through Friday night traffic, and Michael spent the entire ride rehearsing speeches that all sounded hollow. Elizabeth was waiting in the lobby when he arrived, wearing jeans and a sweater that made her look younger than 32. She led him to the elevator without speaking, and they rode to the 40th floor in silence that felt heavier than words. The penthouse looked different at night, city lights transforming the windows into panels of glittering darkness. Elizabeth gestured to the couch, and Michael sat on the edge while she poured 2 glasses of wine. She handed him one and sat in the chair across from him, close enough to talk, but far enough to maintain distance. "I've been thinking about what you said, about the job offer." Elizabeth waited, glass cradled in both hands. And I've been thinking about why I said no. Michael took a breath. You were right. I was choosing pride over Sarah's future. I was so focused on proving I didn't need help that I forgot there's a difference between being used and being loved. The words landed in the space between them, and Elizabeth's expression shifted. But I need you to understand something. Michael leaned forward. If I accept this position, I need to know it's real, not just on paper, but in practice. I need to do the work. I need to earn the results. I need to prove to everyone, including myself, that I belong there. I wouldn't have offered it if I didn't believe you could do exactly that. I know. But belief isn't enough. Michael set down his wine glass. I need you to hold me to the same standard you'd hold anyone else. Higher even. Because people will be watching. They'll be waiting for me to fail so they can say they were right. Then don't fail. Elizabeth's voice was steady. Don't give them the satisfaction. The confidence in her words wrapped around Michael like armor. He stood and crossed to the window, looking out at the city stretched below them. 40 floors up, the problems on the ground looked small and manageable. But he knew better. Distance didn't solve anything. It just changed the perspective. There's something else. Michael turned to face her. Richard put me on a performance improvement plan. 90 days to prove I'm worth keeping. If I accept your offer now, he'll use it as evidence of favoritism. He'll make sure everyone knows. Let him. Elizabeth stood and joined him at the window. I'm tired of caring what Richard Phillips thinks. I'm tired of letting men like him dictate who gets opportunities and who gets buried. Michael looked at her profile silhouetted against the city lights. What are you saying? I'm saying I'm creating those 3 innovation positions like I told you. I'm restructuring the entire operations division, and I'm firing Richard on Monday morning. The declaration hit like a physical blow. You can't do that because of me. I'm not doing it because of you. I'm doing it because I pulled the files. Elizabeth turned to face him. 14 employees have filed discrimination complaints against Richard in the past 6 years. HR buried every single one. He's stolen ideas from at least 8 analysts and claimed credit. He's created a hostile work environment that's costing us talent and money. Her voice hardened. You showed me the problem when you refused to accept help. You made me look at my own company and see what I'd been ignoring. So yes, I'm firing him. And yes, people will assume it's because of us. But the documentation speaks for itself. Michael processed this information slowly. What happens when the board finds out we're together? They already know. Elizabeth smiled without humor. Someone sent Robert Harrison photos of me leaving your apartment building 3 weeks ago. He called an emergency meeting Tuesday. Michael's blood went cold. And I told them the truth, that I'm seeing someone, that it's serious, that my personal life is none of their business as long as I'm performing my duties as CEO. She paused. The vote to force me to end things failed 8-3. Why didn't you tell me? Because you had enough to worry about. Because I didn't want you to feel responsible. Because I was handling it. The realization settled over Michael like cold water. While he'd been agonizing over accepting help, Elizabeth had been fighting battles he didn't even know existed. Protecting him, protecting what they had, risking her position and her company for something that might not even survive the scrutiny. I'm sorry. Don't be. Elizabeth took his hand. I made my choice. Now you need to make yours. Michael looked down at their joined hands, her fingers pale against his darker skin. He thought about Sarah's drawing with its purple crayon blessing from a woman who'd taught him love was brave. He thought about Jennifer's last words about not stopping living. He thought about Barbara cleaning houses for 15 years so he could go to college. Dignity wasn't about doing everything alone. It was about knowing your worth and refusing to let anyone diminish it. "I'll take the position." Michael's voice came out steady. "On one condition. Name it. You let me prove myself. No special treatment, no protection, no making things easier because we're together. I succeed or fail on my own merit." Elizabeth's smile was small but genuine. "Deal." She squeezed his hand. "There's something else you should know." Michael braced himself. "Sarah's surgery. I called Dr. Chen's office and asked about the hospital's charity care program. They have a fund for families in financial hardship. I made a donation to that fund, a significant one." She met his eyes. "I didn't pay for Sarah's surgery. I funded a program that helps families like yours. The hospital will evaluate your application independently." The distinction mattered, and Michael knew Elizabeth understood why. It was the difference between charity and systemic change, between being singled out and being part of something larger. It still felt like help, but help he could accept without losing himself. "Thank you. Don't thank me. Use it. Get Sarah the care she needs. Then pay it forward when you can." Michael pulled Elizabeth into his arms, and she melted against him with a sigh that sounded like relief. They stood at the window while the city glittered below, two people who'd found each other in the wreckage of their separate griefs and somehow built something that felt like hope. "I love you." The words slipped out before Michael could second-guess them, raw and unpolished and true. Elizabeth pulled back just enough to look at his face. "Say it again." Michael understood what she was asking, the same thing he'd demanded from her, proof through repetition. Honesty reinforced until doubt couldn't find purchase. "I love you, Elizabeth Morgan. Not your money, not your position, just you. Again." Her voice was barely a whisper. "I love you. I love how you make purple pancakes, even though you've never cooked anything in your life. I love how you listen to Sarah, like her stories matter. I love that you're fighting your own board to protect something that scares you." Michael cupped her face in his hands. "I love you." Elizabeth's eyes filled with tears. "I love you too. And I'm terrified." "Of what?" "Of losing you, of not being enough, of failing Sarah, of proving everyone right who said I can't have both the company and a life. Then we'll be terrified together." Michael kissed her forehead. "But we'll be brave about it." They spent the night talking through logistics and timelines and what Monday morning would look like when everything became public. Richard's termination, the restructuring announcement, Michael's new position. It would be messy and complicated, and people would talk. But the alternative was hiding. And hiding meant teaching Sarah that love was something to be ashamed of. Michael left at midnight and drove home through empty streets. The apartment was quiet when he entered, Barbara asleep on the couch where she'd been watching Sarah. He paid her and walked her to her car, then checked on his daughter one more time before collapsing into bed. Sunday passed in a blur of normalcy, laundry and grocery shopping, and playing board games while rain hammered the windows. Sarah asked if Miss Elizabeth could come over again, and Michael promised they'd arrange something soon. He didn't mention that soon everything would change, that by Monday afternoon everyone would know his business. The emergency room memory returned suddenly, visceral and sharp. Sarah unconscious in his arms, her lips that terrible blue, the hospital corridor and the trauma bay doors swinging shut. Wednesday night felt like months ago instead of days, and Michael realized he'd been living in that moment ever since, frozen in panic, paralyzed by fear of making the wrong choice. But Sarah had survived. She'd woken up and eaten purple pancakes and drawn pictures that blessed the future instead of mourning the past. She was braver than he was, and it was time he learned from her. Monday morning arrived with clear skies and temperatures cold enough to frost the car windows. Michael dressed in his best suit and drove to Morgan Industries with his heart hammering against his ribs. The parking lot was filling up with the early arrivals, and he took his usual spot in the back corner where the pavement was cracked and weeds grew through the asphalt. The operations floor was nearly empty at 7:45. Michael settled into his cubicle and opened his email to find a calendar invitation. All staff meeting, 9 a.m., main auditorium. Mandatory attendance, organizational changes. The message came from Elizabeth's office, and Michael's stomach dropped. This was it, the announcement that would change everything. By 8:50, the operations floor had transformed into chaos. People clustered in groups, speculating about layoffs and restructuring and whether the rumors about the CEO dating someone were true. Michael kept his head down and made his way to the auditorium on the second floor, a space that seated 300 and was already three-quarters full. He found a seat in the back row and waited while the room filled around him. Across the aisle, Brad Williams was holding court with a group of analysts, voice loud with false confidence. "I heard they're eliminating entire departments." Brad leaned back in his seat, "Probably getting rid of dead weight." Someone muttered agreement, and Michael caught the sideways glance in his direction. The implication was clear. He was the dead weight, the diversity hire who'd outlived his usefulness. The lights dimmed at 9:02, and Elizabeth walked onto the stage wearing a charcoal suit that made her look every inch the CEO. She carried no notes, no PowerPoint, no props, just herself and a microphone and 300 employees waiting to hear their fates. "Thank you all for coming." Her voice carried through the sound system with perfect clarity. "I'm going to be direct because that's what this moment requires." The room went silent. This company was built by my father on principles of innovation and excellence. But somewhere along the way, we lost sight of those principles. We built hierarchies that rewarded politics over performance. We created systems that buried good ideas under layers of bureaucracy. We allowed talented people to be overlooked because they didn't fit someone's idea of what leadership should look like. Elizabeth paused, letting the words settle. That ends today. Effective immediately, I'm restructuring the operations division. We're creating 3 new Director of Innovation positions focused on process optimization and system improvement. These positions will report directly to me and have the authority to implement changes across departments. Murmurs rippled through the audience. Elizabeth waited for silence before continuing. I'm also terminating Richard Phillips for violations of company policy and creating a hostile work environment. An investigation revealed 14 documented complaints that were improperly handled. This is unacceptable, and I take full responsibility for not catching it sooner. The murmurs became gasps. Michael saw heads turning, people looking for Richard's reaction. But Richard wasn't in the auditorium. He was probably already being escorted from the building by security. The 3 new directors are individuals who have demonstrated exceptional skill and innovative thinking over multiple years. Their appointments are based solely on merit, and I'm confident they will drive this company forward. Elizabeth's eyes found Michael in the back row, held for a fraction of a second, then moved on. Their names and backgrounds will be announced by HR this afternoon. She paused again, and the room leaned forward collectively. There's one more thing I need to address. Some of you may have heard rumors about my personal life, about relationships that might constitute conflicts of interest. Let me be clear. Elizabeth's voice hardened. I have done nothing that violates company policy. I have disclosed all relevant information to the board, and I will not apologize for being human." The silence that followed was absolute. Elizabeth let it stretch until the tension became unbearable. "I expect the same professionalism from all of you that I demand from myself. Your job is to do excellent work. My job is to ensure you have the tools and support to do it. Everything else is noise." She turned and walked off stage without waiting for questions, heels clicking against the floor in the sudden quiet. The lights came up, and 300 people sat stunned for a long moment before the whispers started. Michael stayed seated while the auditorium emptied around him. He watched people file out in clusters, already forming the narratives they'd carry back to their departments. Some would see this as overdue reform. Others would see it as favoritism run amok. Most would land somewhere in the middle, waiting to see how the dust settled. His phone buzzed with a text from Elizabeth. "HR will call you at 2 o'clock. Don't answer any questions until then." Michael left the auditorium and returned to his cubicle, where 3 of his coworkers were already dissecting the announcement. Brad saw him coming and fell silent, expression shifting to something ugly. "Well, well, looks like someone's moving up in the world." Michael ignored him and sat down at his desk. The morning crawled by in increments of email and speculation. At 11:30, an HR representative appeared at his cubicle with a security guard. "Mr. Davis, please gather your personal belongings and come with me." The floor went quiet. Michael felt every eye on him as he stood and followed the HR rep toward the elevator. The security guard walked behind them, and Michael's mind raced through possibilities. Had Elizabeth changed her mind? Had the board overruled her? Was this the moment where everything fell apart? They took him to the executive floor, to a corner office with windows on 2 walls and a view that stretched to the horizon. The nameplate beside the door read Director of Innovation, Michael Davis. Inside, Elizabeth stood beside a desk that held a computer and a phone and a folder stamped with HR letterhead. The HR representative gestured for Michael to sit, and Elizabeth remained standing. "Mr. Davis, I'm pleased to offer you the position of Director of Innovation, effective immediately." The rep slid the folder across the desk. "Your salary will be $145,000 annually, with full benefits and quarterly performance reviews. Do you accept?" Michael looked at the folder, at Elizabeth's face, at the office that represented everything he'd worked toward for 4 years. He thought about Sarah's surgery scheduled for 6 weeks from now, funded by a charity program that Elizabeth had quietly expanded. He thought about Jennifer's voice telling him love was brave. He thought about dignity, meaning knowing your worth, not proving it through suffering. "I accept." The HR rep produced documents that Michael signed while Elizabeth watched from beside the window. When the last signature was complete, the rep and security guard left, and Michael was alone with Elizabeth in his new office. "How does it feel?" Michael stood and crossed to the window, looking down at the city 40 floors below. "Terrifying, exciting, like I'm about to either prove everyone right or everyone wrong." Elizabeth joined him at the window. "You'll prove yourself right. That's the only opinion that matters." They stood in silence while the city sprawled beneath them, 2 people who'd found each other in impossible circumstances and decided to be brave about it anyway. 6 weeks later, Michael sat in a hospital waiting room while Sarah underwent surgery to replace her damaged heart valve. The procedure was scheduled for 4 hours, and he'd been sitting in the same plastic chair for 3, watching the clock tick forward in agonizing increments. Barbara sat beside him, reading a magazine she wasn't actually seeing, and Elizabeth was at the cafeteria getting coffee. None of them would drink. The waiting room held 6 other families in various stages of anxious limbo, all of them existing in the terrible space between hope and fear. At hour 4, a surgeon in blue scrubs emerged through the double doors and scanned the room. His eyes found Michael. "Mr. Davis?" Michael stood on legs that barely supported his weight. The surgeon's face was neutral, professional, impossible to read. "The surgery went well. We were able to repair the valve rather than replace it, which is the best possible outcome for her age. She's in recovery now, stable, and responding well to anesthesia." The relief hit Michael so hard he had to sit back down. Barbara pressed her hands over her mouth, and Elizabeth appeared at his shoulder with coffee cups still in hand. "Can I see her? Give us another hour to get her settled in ICU. Then you can stay as long as you like." The surgeon disappeared back through the doors, and Michael buried his face in his hands. Barbara rubbed his back while he cried tears that had nothing to do with sadness and everything to do with the unbearable weight of fear finally lifting. An hour later, they were led to Sarah's room in the pediatric ICU. She looked impossibly small in the hospital bed, tubes and wires connecting her to machines that beeped and hummed. Her chest rose and fell with mechanical precision, and a white bandage covered the surgical incision. Michael took her hand carefully, mindful of the IV taped to her wrist. Sarah's eyes fluttered open, unfocused and glassy from medication. "Daddy, I'm right here, baby girl. You did so good. You're all fixed." Sarah's gaze wandered until it found Elizabeth standing at the foot of the bed. "Did it work?" Elizabeth moved closer, and Michael watched his daughter reach out with her free hand. Elizabeth took it gently. "It worked perfectly. You're going to have the strongest heart in your whole school." Sarah smiled, eyes already closing again. "Good, because I want to run fast like the other kids." She drifted back to sleep, and the 3 of them stood vigil while machines tracked the steady rhythm of Sarah's repaired heart. Michael thought about the path that had led them here, from a restaurant where Elizabeth had cried alone, to an office where he'd claimed his worth, to a hospital room where his daughter breathed easier than she ever had. It made you wonder how often people missed their chances at happiness because they were too afraid to be vulnerable. How many opportunities died because pride felt safer than hope. How much love went unexpressed because the risk of rejection seemed bigger than the reward of connection. 2 days later, Sarah was transferred to a regular room and permitted visitors beyond immediate family. She held court from her hospital bed while Barbara brought purple balloons, and Elizabeth read stories from the stack of books they'd bought at the gift shop. Michael took a photo of the 3 of them together, Sarah grinning gap-toothed with her surgical scar hidden beneath her hospital gown. That photo would go on his new desk beside the one of Jennifer, both women who'd taught him different lessons about love. Jennifer had shown him what it meant to build a life with someone. Elizabeth was showing him what it meant to rebuild one. Sarah came home on a Friday afternoon with instructions for wound care and activity restrictions and follow-up appointments. Michael carried her from the car to the apartment where she'd lived her whole life, and she settled onto the couch with her stuffed elephant and a pile of library books. That weekend, Elizabeth came over with groceries and helped Michael cook dinner while Sarah supervised from the couch. They made spaghetti and garlic bread. Nothing fancy, but warm and filling. Afterward, Sarah fell asleep watching a movie, and Michael carried her to bed while Elizabeth cleaned the kitchen. "This is nice." Elizabeth dried dishes and stacked them in the cabinet. "Domestic." Michael leaned against the counter and watched her move through his small kitchen like she belonged there. "It is. I've never had this." She turned to face him. Never had someone to cook with, never had a child to read stories to, never had a home that felt like more than a place to sleep. You have it now. Michael crossed the space between them. If you want it. Elizabeth set down the dish towel and took his hands. I want it. I want you. I want Sarah. I want Sunday mornings and purple pancakes and terrible movies on the couch. I want all of it. They kissed in the warm kitchen while water dripped from the faucet and the refrigerator hummed, and it felt like the beginning of something permanent. 15 months later, Michael stood in his backyard watching Sarah run through purple balloons with friends from school. Her 8th birthday party was in full swing, kids shrieking and adults talking in clusters while Barbara and Margaret worked together in the kitchen putting candles on a cake. The surgical scar on Sarah's chest had faded to a thin white line that she wore like a badge of honor. Davis Consulting occupied half of Michael's garage, converted into an office where he worked with companies across the city to optimize their operations. The business was 6 months old and already profitable, built on a reputation for innovation and integrity. Elizabeth had been his first client, hiring him to consult on the restructuring she'd initiated. Their professional relationship remained scrupulously documented and above board, every hour billed and every recommendation evaluated by independent auditors. The board had grumbled, but couldn't argue with results. Morgan Industries' operational costs were down 18%, while productivity was up 23%. The innovation directors Elizabeth had appointed were thriving, and employee retention had reached a 10-year high. She'd proven that good leadership meant empowering people, not controlling them. Sarah appeared at Michael's side with a piece of paper clutched in both hands. Want to see what I made? The drawing showed 4 figures holding hands, Michael and Elizabeth and Sarah, all rendered in careful crayon. Above them, a woman with curly hair floated in clouds that were colored purple. Who's that? That's Mommy. Sarah pointed to the figure in heaven. I asked her if it was okay that Miss Elizabeth lives with us now. I think she said yes. The wisdom of it hit Michael sideways. Sarah had somehow understood what took him months to learn. The heart doesn't replace, it expands. Loving Elizabeth didn't erase Jennifer, it honored her by refusing to let grief be the only thing that remained. What makes you think she said yes? Sarah shrugged. Because you smile now, like you used to in the pictures from when I was a baby. Elizabeth appeared beside them carrying 2 plates of cake, and Sarah took one before running back to her friends. Elizabeth handed Michael the other and leaned against his shoulder. What was that about? Michael showed her the drawing. Sarah's been giving us her blessing. Smart kid. Elizabeth smiled. Takes after her father. They stood together watching purple balloons drift across the yard, and Michael thought about the path that had brought them here, from desperation to connection to courage to something that looked like joy. It hadn't been easy. There had been battles and doubts and moments where giving up seemed simpler than fighting forward. But Jennifer's voice echoed in his memory with words she'd spoken during her sickest days. Love is brave. And she'd been right. Love was the bravest thing he'd ever done. Both times he'd chosen it. Have you ever experienced something like this? A moment where everything you thought you knew about yourself turned out to be wrong, and the person who showed you the truth was someone you never expected to meet? Sarah's teacher had asked the class to write about brave choices, and Sarah had written about her daddy choosing to love again. The teacher had read it aloud, and 3 other parents had thanked Michael afterward for showing their kids what courage looked like in practice. Sarah ran back over with frosting on her face and tugged Elizabeth's hand. Can you help me with the piñata? Elizabeth set down her cake and followed Sarah across the yard, and Michael watched them work together to hang the purple donkey from the tree branch. His daughter and the woman he loved, building memories in a backyard that felt like home. Barbara appeared at his shoulder with a knowing smile. "You did good, baby. She did the hard part." Michael gestured toward Sarah, directing operations while Elizabeth tied knots. "I'm not talking about the surgery." Barbara's voice was soft. "I'm talking about letting yourself be happy again. That's the hardest thing for people like us, people who've lost everything and had to build it back." Michael thought about dignity and pride and the difference between strength and stubbornness. He thought about the man he'd been 2 years ago, frozen in grief and convinced that survival was the best he deserved. He thought about Sarah's drawing and Jennifer's blessing and Elizabeth's patient belief that he was worth fighting for. The heart doesn't replace, it expands, and his had expanded enough to hold all of it. The grief and the hope, the memory and the future, the love he'd lost and the love he'd found. There was room for all of it, and the only thing required was the courage to let it in. Sarah hit the piñata with a stick while her friends cheered, and candy exploded across the grass in a shower of purple wrappers. Michael crossed the yard to join them, and Elizabeth caught his hand as he passed. Their fingers laced together naturally, a gesture so familiar it felt like they'd been doing it for years instead of months. Above them, a purple butterfly landed on the fence post and sat perfectly still, wings opening and closing in the afternoon sun. Sarah saw it first and pointed with wonder. "Look!" Mommy sent her blessing. Michael didn't believe in signs, but he believed in hope. And right now, watching Sarah celebrate her 8th birthday with a heart that finally worked right, and a family that had expanded to include broken pieces made beautiful, hope felt like enough. Some broken things, when put back together, are stronger than before, not despite the cracks, but because of them. Because the people doing the rebuilding know what it means to lose something precious, and they handle the pieces with care, earned through hard experience. Michael had been shattered by grief and poverty, and a world that tried to convince him he was worth less than he was. But Sarah and Elizabeth had helped him rebuild, piece by careful piece, until what remained was something stronger than what had been there before. Not perfect, not without scars, but whole in the ways that mattered. The purple butterfly lifted from the fence and disappeared into the sky, and Michael chose to see it as Jennifer's approval, not replacing her, but blessing what came after, making room for the family he'd built from the ruins of the one he'd lost. Sarah's laughter rang across the yard, and Elizabeth squeezed his hand, and Barbara started singing "Happy Birthday" in her rich alto voice that carried over the noise. Michael joined in, and then everyone joined in, and for 3 minutes they were all connected by the simple act of celebrating a child who'd survived when survival wasn't guaranteed. When the song ended and Sarah blew out 8 purple candles with one breath, Michael made a silent wish of his own. Not for money or success or even happiness, though he had pieces of all three. He wished for courage, for the continued bravery to choose love even when it scared him, for the wisdom to know the difference between dignity and pride, for the strength to keep building rather than hiding behind walls that protected nothing but fear. The candles smoked, and the kids descended on the cake, and the afternoon rolled forward into evening. And Michael stood in his backyard with his daughter and the woman he loved, and his mother who'd raised him to know his worth, and he felt something he hadn't felt in years. He felt home.